I just put this that picture in there 20 minutes ago. Okay. Because I saw a little film in the bar yesterday with a Dane and a Finland who didn't like the size of the cod in Norway. They are actually bigger than that size. This is from a competition a couple of weeks ago, the World Championship of pelagic cod fishing, skrei, which you call it. In 6 hours, the competitors caught 74 tons of cod, 7,400 kilos of cod in 6 hours. They doubled the last record. So is fish out there? You have to go far north. Well, that was just a sidetrack. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to talk about here, but this is titled. My name is Øyvind Fjeldseth. I'm from the Norwegian Association of Hunters and Anglers. The last time I was on the station, this building actually was 4 years ago in my underwear, so this is deja vu. So you can figure what I did then. I did not dance. Well, I did a little bit of that as well. My organization is the only nationwide interest organization for hunters and anglers. So we have been combined since 1871. So it's quite an old organization in Norway as well. We have approximately 120,000 members, 570 local clubs, and 80 to 90 employees. So we are quite a large organization when it comes to human resources, both the members, which is the largest resource, but also when it comes to employing people. This is Norway in water. We have an extremely long coastline, 103,000 kilometers. As I've heard, it's the second largest in the world, only beaten by Canada. So it's a very long coastline if you take the islands in there. 240,000 islands. So it's a lot of islands, small and large. A little bit over 200,000 lakes of some size. Some are quite large. A lot of them are quite deep because of the history during the ice ages and so on. It's been dug out. Of the 10 deepest lakes in Europe, I think 8 of them is in Norway. So we have a lot of large and deep lakes. 450 salmon rivers. 350 of them with fishing, approximately 2,000 with sea trout, depending on which numbers you use. Most of those are very small, but there are separate stocks, and of course a lot of creeks and rivers. Saltwater, 208 species, give or take a few. Freshwater, only 42 species. We have very few species. 6 or 7 of them are introduced. But the most typical kind of lake and river system in Norway has very few species, 1 to 3 species typically. It might be only trout and char, whitefish, trout and perch, and so on. Few species. So this is our natural heritage, and we must protect that as well. So just part of it. These numbers have been mentioned earlier. This is numbers from 2006, and they are 2007. They are quite uncertain. International surveys where they ask all kinds of questions, and therefore the numbers are quite concerning. 46% of the adult population, and a much higher proportion of the younger part of the population. And there are more men than women who is out there they're fishing. And this is the people who are out fishing even one time. And I guess if you ask the ones who are fishing more than 10 times, for example, the number of males will be much higher. the proportion, I mean. And I don't know if the number 11 times per year is right. I heard the same number from, was it Denmark? Just a few minutes ago. But that's the numbers you get out. Anyway, it gives 18 to 20 million fishing days a year if you use those numbers and believe that they are right. I'm not sure how right they are, but if you take 1.7 million persons and add it up, you get a high number. But we are getting fewer. There are about 100,000 fewer fishermen in 2007 than it was in 1993. 1993 came after the 80s, which was economic bad time in Norway as well. And then people tend to go fishing. So bad economy can be good for participation in angling, at least. I've said that before. And each angler takes part in few trips. It was 16 on average in 17 and 11 trips in 2007. And I'm not sure if that's the questions have been asked the same way here, so they might be very different. The tourist fishing has increased. You're going to talk more about that soon. 300,000 to 400,000. This is what we do every now and then. Try to get the young people out fishing. To get them into the activity. The management, this is very short. The Ministry of Climate and Environment deals with inland fish via their environmental agency. Agency of Environment, I guess is the right name. So they deal with inland species and anadromous species. They are quite recreationally oriented, or oriented towards the recreational fishing. The saltwater species is managed by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Fisheries. It's a new constellation this year. Earlier it was just the Ministry of Fisheries, and I think that was much better. I think so, at least. Well, it lies in the name. These are quite commercially oriented. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but they are, of course. They deal with the commercial fishery and has very little thoughts around angling. And I guess that's the reason for that is that the angling in Norway in the sea has always been easy. No problem. But we see now that, especially at the south coast, that the stocks are very bad and has been so for tens of years. And then I have to look into the angling issues as well, because we are a lot of people in the south, approximately 2 million people, and 30–40% of them fish each year. So a lot of people. So we, as anglers, catch a lot more fish, I think, than the commercial fishermen down there. While in the north, they fish maybe 2 million tons of fish. And the anglers, they catch like this compared to that. But in the south, we are a real big player when it comes to killing fish. No doubt about it. And we think that's okay, as long as the stocks can sustain or can deal with that kind of pressure. But maybe we must restrict ourselves more in certain areas. Well, this is just the inland fishery, the freshwater fishery, is owned by private landowners or by the state, as we heard from Sweden yesterday. And you may only fish if you have a permission from the landowner or have bought a license. There are a lot of places you can fish without a license. It's okay, they don't bother. And there's a variety of local rules. This is very local rules, very few rules from the authorities. When it comes to fishing for anadromous species, it abounds that you have a state fishing license, and then you have to buy a local license on top of that. But it's still quite affordable in most rivers. It costs like the same amount that you would use if you went to an alpine skiing place and be there for the day. Same kind of prices. Quite cheap, but not that cheap that we would do it every day. Unless you have a lot of money. Kids under the age of 16 can fish for free in freshwater as long as it's not another species there. And that's in the period from the 1st of January to the 20th of August. I won't go into why the 20th of August is there, but that's a negotiation case between us and the landowners 20 years ago. When it comes to the marine recreational fishery, we have different rules when it comes to domestic anglers and foreign anglers or tourists. There are not so many different rules in freshwater between those two groups. There is a minimum size on 25 species or so. Everyone can use a handheld tackle or a some kind of rod. You can also have a jigging machine, which I think is strange, but that's the way it is. You want a motor on so that you can pinch it up. Gill nets of 210 meters, a little bit shorter at the south coast. One line up to 300 hooks. And crab pots or pike nets in the number of 20. A little bit fewer in a lobster season. Half of that. And there's no license, and you can sell fish up to 50,000 Norwegian kroner. You have to divide that with 8 to get euros and 6 or so to get the dollar. But it's not a very large, but it's quite a lot of fish. There's not a lot of people who do that, but some do. Non-residents, they can use, well, the minimum size applies for them as well, of course. No license, handheld tackle only, and they have an export limit of 15 kilos. But they can buy fish from a local commercial fisherman as well. They just have to have the receipt. The export limit has been discussed widely. The Swedes want it much higher. The Germans want it much higher. We think it's okay, of course. We want to keep the fish for ourselves. That's the way it is. But it means that the fish that goes out of the country is not round fish. You can, you can have a trophy fish as well on top of this. If you catch a halibut of 200, 300 kilos, you can bring that as well. But, so. It means that people cut out the finest meat of the fish and throw away the rest. So it's really, it has its sides, which is not necessarily possible. The non-resident anglers, they do a lot of catch and release as well. So they, even though they are 300,000-400,000, they do not necessarily catch that much fish as one should expect, because they are, for the most part, very good anglers compared to the average Norwegian angler, at least. Yeah, they can't sell their catch. That was it. No politics.
I have a question. I'm not sure if I missed that slide, but that was domestic marine fishing. But what about inland fishing, domestic for Norwegians? What are the regulations in general?
No particular. Well, there are in Finland and so on. You can't go further away from the road than 4 kilometers and so on. And normally you can only use handheld rod or a handheld line.
So what's the policy with nets?
Huh?
With nets, for example?
No, normally not. No.
Right, that's what I thought.
But there are local rules. Yeah.
The Minister was talking about making a regulation forbidding the import of boats for me to take my boat to fish in Norway. What's happening with that at the moment?
Oh, I'm not sure.
That's a private person, you can do that, but that's for commercial purpose. I mean,
No,
the-
there's a private person taking a boat to angle,
Yeah.
just sea fishing. They were talking about regulating that in Norway because of safety regulations.
But I guess we will have some regulations when it comes to bringing boats into inland waters because of the seas transport applications. Is that?
Yeah, just on the netting policy in inland waters, I don't think there is very much difference between Finland and Norway in terms of netting in inland water. It's quite common, but it's normally restricted to locals.
Yeah, normally it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And netting is
So it's
widespread.
everybody can do it.
No, not everybody,
Our
but
members
not if.
says that 20% or so use nets. And I guess that the reason for that is that large proportion of our members are hunters as well, and they are more meat-oriented. So they like to catch more and have more in their freezers. I don't know. I think that's the reason. 90% of our members fish every year, but we have a very high proportion of hunters. And there's a strange thing there. If you first call yourself a hunter, then you are. If you first hunt, then you call yourself a hunter. And fishing is just something that you do every now and then. But we have a very high proportion of salmon anglers as well. Approximately 50,000 of our members say that they fish for salmon. Sea trout.
I find it interesting that you call a recreational fisherman someone who can sell up to $10,000. What distinguishes a commercial fisherman from that? Is it anything above that number?
Commercial fisherman, he has a license, so that he can sell a lot more, and he has quotas and must deal with there are people out there who can also better around that. But we call them semi-commercial from our organization. We do not think that you should be allowed to sell fish.
It must make it hard then to, the motivations for someone who's selling something versus not selling could be very different, so it seems like it would be hard to characterize that.
These guys are very often either quite young people who just want to earn a few kroner or bucks, or what you call it, and quite old people who is retired, so they just fish. And they have not been commercial fishermen before. Because if you have been a commercial fisherman and retired, then you can use a lot more gear than this. You don't go down to the recreational number of gear, but you have, let's say you can use 100 pots and 5 nets instead of 20 as a normal recreational fisherman. Recreational angler. Strange rules, but they have, well, the tradition is like this, and there's a lot of debate when it comes to those 50,000 kroner, and some want to get rid of it, others think it's okay, at least in parts of the country where there are a few of them, and they deliver fish to the, what you call it, not fish reception, it's the place where you deliver fish at the
Landing site.
Landing site. And some places like in the south, where the commercial fishery is very small, there are only 700 commercial fishermen down in the south, and there are approximately 500,000 anglers. And landing sites there, they do have problems getting enough fish for their sales and so on. So it might be okay for them to get a few buckets of cod or sage or mackerel or whatever.
You mentioned the different rules between the Norwegian and the non-Norwegian. Is that not inconsistent with your obligations under the European Economic Agreement?
I guess not.
Probably.
I guess then it would have been taken away long ago, because Norway is very good on following up those agreements. Too good, yeah.
At least
if you ask me.
It's not
The shoe
about,
is stricter.
it's not Norwegian or non-Norwegian, because
No.
as a foreigner living in Norway,
Yeah.
you can use the same. As long as you are registered and have a tax number or a personal number, then you're part of the system, and then you can then you're treated the same way. It's just for tourists coming from abroad.
So if you as an Icelander live in Norway, you can fish as a Norwegian. No problem.
Okay, I think that.
Yes.